had put in place, they had said that were targets, those are the targets that the US has hit and has destroyed. And by this I mean, for example, Saddam Hussein's Iraq. We see Lebanon, we see Libya, we see Syria, how little by little over the decades, in the end, the US has followed Netanyahu's warmongering plans for the destabilization in the region. And right now, it's just another of the goals of Netanyahu to try to destroy Iran. In turn, what Iran has shown is to be ready to defend itself against the aggressions of the Israeli regime. So as we were saying, talking about the involvement of the US, more than evident, the one that has been providing all the military support to Israel, but also not only the military support, but also the political support in the international arena. And this is quickly seen in the double standards that exist in today's world. We are now seeing a straight aggression from Israel to a sovereign nation, which is the case of the Persian nation of Iran. And there have been no condemnations outside from regional actors and from traditional allies that have always been against the Zionist expansionist plans and its aggressions on the people, in this case of, for example, the Palestinian people in Gaza and West Bank, and the Lebanese people as well, and the Syrian people, as Israel has never stopped against these countries, and now are attacking Iran. And this is even more evidence when on Thursday Israel attacked, violating any kind of international law, violating the airspaces of Jordan and Iraq, attacked Iran, and when Iran was getting ready to respond, the message that comes from, for example, the United Kingdom is to call on Iran to show restraint. But no one has called on Israel from, as I was saying, that traditional Western hegemonic area, and by that I mean the US and its traditional allies. No one has called on restraint on Israel, which continues to deteriorate by itself, and with the support, both military and political, at the international arena, continues to deteriorate the regional stability and peace by carrying on these Zionist expansionist plans and aggressions against the peoples of the region. This is also even more evidence, and our correspondent Yunus Uner was talking about this, about the lack of credibility that international organizations have, especially in that area in the Middle East, as you were saying, that no one even is talking about the international community anymore. They're just talking about the US and the US interests, and this is more evidence with the recent sanctions on the judges of the International Criminal Court. We must remember that Benjamin Netanyahu has an arrest warrant for its crimes against humanity, for its war crimes, for genocide being committed in Gaza. And instead of, the evidence is there, is in Gaza, we can see those images every day. Instead of holding Israel accountable, what they do is to sanction the judges for doing their job, for sanctioning, for issuing this arrest warrant against the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. So all international organizations, these international organizations have lost their credibility, something that has been denounced for years now by other sectors, by other nations, saying that calling for the United Nations to reform itself, to adapt to the new times, as the peoples of the world are saying that they do not provide any kind of function and they don't provide any kind of solution. We can see this after the 2 years. I don't think there's nothing else that puts this more in evidence after the 2 years of genocide in Gaza, which has put it on a global scale the levels of the atrocious crimes committed by the Israeli occupation forces against the Palestinian people. Because even though these this oppression, in a way, these attacks against the Palestinian people dates back to the mid-20th century, to the 1870s, back to what the Palestinians referred to the Nakba, the Great Catastrophe. Going all the way back, I don't think it's ever been so blatantly clear of the violations of human rights and the violations against the Palestinian people in the occupied territory as it has been in these past 2 years, with over 55,000 people killed so far, with over 16,000 children killed so far, with more journalists killed Palestinian journalists killed in Gaza than in any other conflict right now. And yet, the international community has done nothing. They have turned a blind eye. And by international community, I refer to the powerful, to the Western hegemonic sectors. That they have done nothing to end this genocide. And that's why now we're seeing this aggression, and they see no response coming from that traditional sector, as we were saying. The region has come up and they have condemned the attack, as our correspondent Yunus Soner was saying. In a way, they are creating a more united front. There was already, we can say, a semi-united front against Israel's, from that region, against Israel's Zionist expansionists. It's for the support of the Palestinian cause and for the departure. They were against the U.S. presence in different bases across the region, and these actions are providing more structure, more foundation for a more united front against the Zionist entity of Israel and against the U.S. presence in the regions and its continued interference in the actions. So just a quick recap, as we were saying. Iran just launched its latest response a few hours ago. A couple hours ago, they launched its latest response against different targets in Israel and in the occupied Palestinian territories, hitting important targets, hitting military factories, hitting the Ben Gurion airport in Tel Aviv, hitting key infrastructure of the Israeli Zionist entity as it continues to show its successful counterattacks to the Israeli aggressions. The settlement of Bet Jam, one of the hardest hit by the Iranian response, is reporting right now, after this latest attack, 22 buildings that need to be detonated because of the heavy damage they have sustained due to the Iranian response.
Yo, Himale. תורד למטורף. למה לא פה? למה לא לא? אם הייתי עכשיו בארץ, יו, Himale.
Or as we were saying, this Sunday, both Israel and Iran have continued to exchange fire. Earlier in the day, Israel carried out airstrikes against different areas of Iran, targeting different areas, but also civilian infrastructures in Iran. We reported on the detonation of at least 5 car bombs in different sectors of the capital, targeting police stations and government buildings. Also, Zionist agents also targeted a water facility supply in the that triggered a flood in the capital, that also putting in evidence the attacks on the Iranian civilian structures, which puts in evidence the falsehood of the intentions for Israel to carry out this aggression, which supposedly, as said by the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, supposedly was intended to attack Iran's nuclear capabilities. But their targets they are hitting are civilians, military, but also civilians, like is in the case of this water service area, and also they have been hitting for. They're also been hitting different. They're also been hitting different civilian areas, residential buildings, with authorities reporting so far over 128 people killed in Iran and over 900 injured. Among the victims, they are also reporting children. Among the victims, over 25 children are believed to have perished in the Israeli aggressions. Now, I was saying the alleged intentions of the nuclear capabilities, because if we read the annual threat assessment that is developed every year by the U.S. Security Intelligence Community, it was published this March 25th. If you go on to its page 26, so I'm quoting this. I'm going to quote this, and any of our viewers can check this, and we'll see that on the annual threat assessment of the U.S. intelligence community, published March 2025, page 26, it clearly states that, and I quote, "We continue to assess Iran is not building a nuclear weapon, and that Khamenei, the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei of Iran, has not reauthorized the nuclear weapons program he suspended in 2003. So even the U.S. intelligence community is acknowledging that Iran is not building a nuclear weapon, and yet that is the basis for this latest Israeli aggression. Now, this Israeli aggression comes in a context, if we zoom out a bit of these strikes. This Sunday, June 15, was supposed to happen the sixth round of indirect talks between the U.S. and Iran, which, according to reports from the Iranian side, the foreign minister earlier this Sunday referred to this. He said that they were confident that if these negotiations had taken place this Sunday, June 15th, they were confident that important steps were going to be made forward towards a negotiated solution to the nuclear issue in Iran, because as the Iranian authorities reported, they were more than willing to sign any document that prevented Iran from being able to acquire or possess a nuclear weapon. The only objection was to limit Iranians' right to the development of the peaceful use of nuclear technology. Nuclear technology is used for energy, it's used in medicine, it's used in different fields. It's not only used in offensive capabilities. So they believe, according to what the foreign minister said himself earlier this Sunday, he referred to the fact that they could move forward in this negotiated solution. So in a way, this Israeli aggression comes in this context, which evidences Israel's very likely intent to sabotage, to torpedo these negotiations. And in a way, since the U.S. president also said in statements that he knew about the possibility of the attack, in a way, it also shows the U.S. lack of reliability to commit to this negotiated solution. So these attacks also comes in that context. So in a way, one of the objectives of the Israeli Zionist entity was to prevent any kind of negotiating solution to the nuclear issue between Iran and the US. So this is the latest information we're getting from the region. Iran responding, successfully counteracting and hitting key infrastructure of the military of the Zionist entity in Israel and the occupied territories, hitting weapons depots, weapons factory. The Ben Gurion airport in Tel Aviv was hit, hitting important key financial structure centers of the Zionist entity, both inside the national territory of Israel, but also within occupied territories, and also showing the counter-attack capabilities that Iran possesses, and also showing the vulnerability that so far was believed to not exist of the Iron Dome and the British and US and Israeli air defenses, which are working together to try to prevent these defensive actions, these retaliatory strikes of Iran against Israel. This is right now what is happening in the Middle East. We are going to continue on this as we continue to have more updates on everything that is developing in that region as the situation escalates, because as the foreign minister of Iran said, and different Iranian authorities have said so far, that as long as Israel continues its attacks, they will continue with their response. That is not their intentions to escalate further if they don't have to, but if they are forced to, they are more than ready to take the situation to the next level.
We're looking at images of the latest attacks that Iran had on Israel. These retaliatory attacks from Iran following the unprompted attacks that Israel carried out early Friday morning. And ever since unleashing this new stage of escalations in the Middle East, in particular, we were looking at images from the occupied Haifa and the impacts and the destruction that these missiles had on the city as well as other cities in Israeli territory. We are looking at images at this moment. Let's recall that there have been several strikes in the last days, in the last minutes, different raids of missiles coming back and forth, and in particular these Operation to Promise 3 launched from Iran in retaliation from the unprompted attacks that Israel launched on Iranian territory, killing military officers and also nuclear scientists. And this is what we are seeing, the consequence of those attacks. Many Iranian officials had warned Israel that this was coming and that this was happening. Also, every international expert says that this response was of course expected due to the level of attacks that Israel had on Iran early Friday morning. So we are looking at the images of those consequences of Operation True Promise 3 as the information keeps coming, and we have been following it in teleSUR English since early Friday morning. with information coming from the occupied territories, also from Iran itself. Some of the sites that were targeted in this last set of attacks, missile attacks, were also reports of the Ben Gurion airport, the main airport in Israel, being attacked. And of course, one of the things that is setting this set of attacks apart in terms of the impact they're having in Israel has to do with the missiles, the Iranian missiles, being able to surpass the anti-missile capabilities of Israel, an anti-missile system that was worldwide known, and a lot of speculation was gathered around the possibilities of Iran hitting the targets in Israel, and that is what we are seeing. We've seen multiple targets hitting Israeli territory, different targets in the capital Tel Aviv, also around the occupied territories. In this case, we're looking at impacts in Haifa. There were reports of severe explosions and also of large fires in Haifa following these latest attacks. We'll continue to provide the latest information. Also, a first image of the ruins of the Weizmann military center in Israel were also launched and distributed by different news outlets in the past hours, once again emphasizing the level and the extent of the impacts and of the damage that these Operation True Promise in this retaliatory attacks sent from Iran are causing on Israel. Let's also recall that the Iranian foreign minister earlier today said that these attacks are retaliatory attacks and that they are based in their self-defense. This means that if Israel is willing to stop attacks on Iranian territory, they would stop their attacks on Israel as well. This is putting pressure on the Israeli authorities to stop their attacks that were started on Friday morning. And in this case, Iran is signaling and underscoring time and time again that this situation started and was escalated by Israel, also in a very significant moment, the moment in which Iran was willing and able to reach a possible nuclear deal. They were having rapprochement talks with U.S. in an indirect way, indirect negotiations that were going to be held in just a few days. And at this moment, those negotiations have been canceled on behalf of Iran, given as how the U.S. has claimed itself to be one of the most close allies of Israel. And in the face of these new attacks, Iran stated that it made no sense to continue holding talks with their aggressor's ally. So we're looking at images at this moment. We reiterate the latest news have to do with recent attacks from Iran on Israeli territory. We're looking at images in Haifa. Also, we have a recent statement from the military wing of Hamas, the Al-Qassam brigades, stating that with great pride and honor, the martyr is Adin Al-Qassam brigades mourn to our Islamic nation, the martyrs of the Islamic nation and the Islamic Republic of Iran, especially the senior commanders of the armed forces who were martyred as a result of the ongoing Zionist aggression against the Islamic Republic. Martyr Commander Major General Mohammad Bagheri, the Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces, also Martyr Commander Major General Hossein Salami, Commander-in-Chief of the IRGC, and Martyr Commander Major General Gholam Ali Rashid, commander of the Qatam Al-Vinia HQ. In this case, some brigades are highlighting their solidarity expressed with the Guard Corps of Iran after the first attacks launched by Israel hit and targeted and murdered top officials of the military, among those the ones that we were just mentioning. Also, we need to recall that in that first set of attacks, they not only targeted and murdered these Iranian top officials, military officials, but also nuclear scientists. Some among the most relevant nuclear scientists in the country were targeted in this unprompted attack that Israel carried out on Iranian territory, and that afterward brought about the retaliatory attacks that we are watching on screen right now, the attacks that Iran is holding on Israel at this moment, called Operation True Promise 3. Now we're bringing some piece of breaking information. According to local news outlets, Iran is officially announcing that the Israeli occupation has assassinated IRGC intelligence chief Mohammad Qasemi, his deputy Hassan Mohaqqaq, and Mossam Bagheri. This is the official confirmation from Iran of the intelligence chief Mohammad Qasemi from the Iranian Revolutionary Corps. This is yet another confirmed assassination of top Iranian leadership in terms of its military power following these attacks that Israel started early Friday morning. At this moment, news outlets are confirming the official announcement on behalf of Iran that Israel and the Israeli forces have assassinated the IRGC intelligence chief Mohammad Qasemi. This is among the latest impacting consequences that Israel is bringing about after it specifically targeted, we were just mentioning it moments ago, it specifically targeted not only military officers as the one that we were just confirming, but also nuclear scientists in an attack that preemptively targeted the nuclear capacities and capabilities of Iran in an attempt to target one of the most important sovereign resources of the country. So we were just mentioning, we reiterate the confirmation of the assassination on behalf of Israeli forces of intelligence chief from the IRGC, Mohammad Qasemi. That is among the latest information that we have at the moment. Right before we were going over a statement made by the military wing of Hamas expressing their solidarity with Iranian military, with the Iranian Guard Corps, in the face of these attacks and the consequences that they were bringing about on their military chiefs. And we have one more confirmation. We continue to look at images, in this case from Haifa. The recent attacks led by Iran, retaliatory attacks that are precisely, as we were saying, bringing a retaliation, a response in terms of a missile response for those attacks that were led by Israel on Friday morning. And they were, at the moment, calling for such a response. Top Iranian leaderships, from the president to the supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, were saying that any sort of attacks on Iranian territory would have a legitimate and sovereign response. That response got the name of Operation True Promise 3, and that is what we are seeing on screen. There have been different raids of missiles targeting different areas of Israeli territory since Friday and Saturday. Up to this point, they have been non-stop, and they have made several and severe impacts. What we were looking at were the results, the aftermath of the latest attacks, in this case in the city of occupied Haifa. Let's recall that in this context, the G7 was trying to seek an agreement on key points to solve the Israel-Iran conflict, following the request, the official request made by Israel that the United States join this conflict, this war on Iran, and the rejection on behalf of the United States of getting directly involved. Of course, many experts and analysts were pointing out at the United States as a definite part in this conflict, as it's a close ally of Israel, and that the first statements that tried to deny any part in the attacks of Friday morning had no base or evidence. However, diplomatically, to this moment, the United States has tried to distance itself from the Israeli offensive, contrary to what Israel has tried to request in terms of more backup and more support. And in this context, we see that G7 is trying to seek an agreement on key points to solve the Israel-Iran conflict. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz said that the upcoming Group of 7 meeting could reach an agreement on 4 key points to help resolve the conflict between Israel and Iran. Speaking as he prepared to fly to Canada for the summit, Merz said that the 4 points were that Iran could not develop or possess nuclear weapons, that Israel had the right to defend itself, and that the conflict should not escalate. Of course, a vision of the Western powers on this conflict, completely disregarding the fact that, for example, it was Israel, none other, the one who started the preemptive attacks and unprompted attacks on Iranian territory early Friday morning. We continue looking at live images in this case, as we see the occupied Jerusalem skyline, including a view of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, as a new wave of Iran's retaliatory strikes has been issued and is also expected to arrive in the coming hours. We continue to reiterate the latest information In this context, we were reiterating and we were informing that the Iranian press was officially announcing the murder of the chief of intelligence of Iranian Revolutionary Guard, Mohammad Qasemi, also of his assistants, Hassan Mohaqqaq. This was first confirmed by Al-Mayadeen, one of the news outlets closely monitoring and closely following this severe escalation of violence. And after that important piece of information, among the latest updates regarding the current situation, the present situation at Israel, we were saying different areas of Israeli territory have been hit by these attacks launched by Iran, retaliatory attacks announced by the supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. We were looking at images of Haifa in particular. Also, Israel, according to Russian news agency TASS, Israel has attacked one of the buildings belonging to the Iranian Foreign Ministry. This was informed by Saeed Jatibzadeh, the Vice Foreign Minister of the Persian nation. Among the latest statements and also updates of information that we have. Let's learn a little bit more about the images that we were saying and seeing on screen. These are the retaliatory attacks from Iran on different cities of Israel, in this case, the city of Haifa. And in this context, the IRNA agency has informed that Iranian missiles have impacted on the military company and its manufacturer Rafael in the city of Haifa. That was among the main targets at the moment. We continue to look at images at the moment from these attacks being carried out by Iran. We were going over some of the most important facts to understand this recent escalation. We were saying that it started early Friday morning with an unprompted attack that Israel launched towards Iran, that Iranian authorities stated time and time again would have a response that they deemed legitimate in terms of self-defense after Israel targeted not only military sites and nuclear sites, also military and nuclear officers and scientists, but also civilian sites and residential areas, causing over 70 people dead, according to Iranian news outlets and official sources. And in response to those attacks came this Operation True Promise 3 that is now underway and that we are closely monitoring on screen in teleSUR English. We continue to update the latest information. We have Iranian reports of aerial defenses that have been activated in different Iranian cities. That includes Sanandaj, Tabriz, Bandar Ansali, Marivan, and Saqqez. We have been closely following after the past few days the Iranian defense systems being activated and repelling different rates of Israeli missiles. We have as well been closely monitoring the way in which the Israeli systems have tried to prevent the Iranian attacks, but after the first rate of attacks, Israeli authorities have stated that the anti-missile system had been oversaturated, something that led to the major impacts that we have seen on screen on different areas and cities of Israel. We continue to go over the recent information and the recent attacks. Iran also sent a special message to the Palestinian people. Let's recall that, of course, in this context, the Palestinian people, and particularly the Palestinians in Gaza, are at the center of this escalation, an escalation in which the Israeli Zionist aspirations have been carrying out an ongoing genocide in Gaza. Iran and its military forces have stood up to defend those Palestinians and have been an important counterpower in the region to Israel's aspirations. So this recent escalation will also have an impact on the future of the ongoing situation in Gaza that has continued to receive Israeli attacks throughout this period of time. So we were saying that Iran sent a special message to the Palestinian people, calling to our brothers and sisters from all occupied Palestine. We ask you to maintain as far away as possible from nuclear installations, from energy centers, from also radiation investigation centers, and any site that holds radioactive material for your own safety and to avoid the possible dangers in the light and in the face of the current events. So that was a message to Palestinians, of course, in occupied territory as they continue to target key areas and sites of the occupied territories occupied too by Israel, as they continue to, we are looking at images from the latest attacks that Iran held on different sites of Israel. And we were mentioning the warning and also the precautionary measure and message that Iran sent to the Palestinians. In order to keep them safe in the face of the current attacks. All of this, as this continues and these recent attacks continue to be underway, and we continue to see different impacts and different consequences on screen. In this case, we were looking at the recent consequences and impact in Haifa. We continue to look at images, on-screen images of Israeli territory following the latest escalation of violence and these retaliatory strikes that Iran sent and continue to come and continue to cause different and severe impacts. We have been looking and monitoring reports from different cities, from Tel Aviv to Haifa in this case, of explosions, of fire, and also targeting key strategic places and areas. In this, we continue to look at those images and continue to follow the recent events to better understand the consequences and the impacts that this will continue to have in the region. We continue to look at different images of the recent attacks. We have images at the moment of the latest attacks that Iran was holding on Israel and the different impacts that they are having. Also, let's recall to better understand the situation and the wider framework of these attacks, that the unprompted attacks that Israel held towards Iran on Friday morning were continued and started in the context of Iran holding different rounds of indirect talks with the United States regarding its nuclear capacities and with the objective of reaching a nuclear deal. At this moment, these deals and these negotiations have been interrupted. Iran has stated that it made no sense to continue negotiating with the aggressor's closest ally, that was the United States. They also stated that they had evidence to show the incorrect or at least biased actions of the International Atomic Agency, and that's what shapes the framework of the impacts that these unprecedented attack had in Iran, and also the repercussions in terms of the capabilities and the nuclear projections of the region and also of the world. We are now going to introduce and welcome Bruno Lima Rocha, politologist and international relations professor. On this topic, Bruno, thank you for joining us here in teleSUR English to better understand this situation. First of all, give us your idea and your view of what is happening at this moment and what is the relevance, what can we expect for the coming hours?
Okay. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. First time in teleSUR in English. Then I would say that the Zionist entity, so-called Israel, has already asked for help, for support on defending and blocking the missiles from Iran. Great Britain, UK already gave the green light. They will help their ally. They will help on combating and trying to defeat Iranian missiles. The leverage and the barrage of missiles from Iran is far from being defended by the Iron Dome and the other assets of Israel. So what maybe is going on now is that the air defense of the Zionist entity is already collapsed. So they are trying to achieve some changes. They asked for Donald Trump to involve directly United States into the war. Washington said no at first time. They asked for help for Western powers, European powers. Great Britain said yes. France said maybe, and the other NATO countries didn't respond yet. And for sure, they did not realize the full power of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Maybe for finishing my intervention, the first one, they were so self-confident after what they did in 2024 that they thought they would attack Iran again, would be waiting 3 days, 5 days, and then Iran would answer with a single attack, not a missile, a long-range campaign. We are going a step further to a conventional war, not only a air force missile war. And if it goes on, Israel itself cannot be defended by only the Zionist military forces.
Now, Bruno, you were mentioning and pointing out the differences between this situation that we are looking at today and the also exchange of attacks that took place in 2024. And you were saying how this is different and we are entering now a conventional war. What does this mean for the coming weeks or months? What does this mean for the ongoing genocide in Palestine, for example? We know that in the past hours, even as this continues, attacks and strikes on Gaza have continued as well. How will this shift the situation that we have been following for over 2 years now?
Well, this is the worst side of this campaign. I really think that the Zionist entity will not only commit a genocide with the Palestinian people, will take them as hostages. We will expose the Palestinian people for even more attacks. We will close all the few humanitarian aid, even this one which is manipulated by a mercenary firm from the CIA, which is so-called HQ. The HQ will be in Switzerland. And will try to commit even more crimes. I noticed this afternoon, local time in occupied Palestine, that Israeli Navy was shooting against people in Gaza Shore, shooting against them, just like this, as the shooting line. And I think that it will go worse. As long as Israel loses more into... as long as Israel loses more space and more air battles against Iran, as more as they will take Palestinian people as hostages.
You were just mentioning also before how the other international powers may play into this. Israel has made a call for Western powers to join this effort, and there's been a lot of questions regarding the role that the United States is playing in this, with also some contradictory messages from the United States itself. As soon as these attacks from Israel started, the first diplomatic statement was to say that the United States was not involved at all. Of course, experts and analysts are saying that as the close ally that it is, the United States is always partially involved in this sort of attacks. And Trump has a bit of a problem in terms of maintaining its promise to Israel, but also maintaining its promise of stopping wars. How would you explain the situation that United States is in at this moment? What do you think it's going to do also in the coming days?
This is the key question now for Western societies, I think so. First, just remembering, as you said, Marco Rubio on Thursday afternoon, Western time, said that United States has nothing to do with this attack and called for the Axis of Resistance to not attack a single asset of the United States because they would retaliate. 12 hours later, Donald Trump said that the attack was a very good maneuver from Netanyahu. He received applause from Netanyahu. for Netanyahu, sorry, and that he was expecting for today, Sunday, 15th of June, June 15th, that Iran would be surrendering. He said this. And now they don't know what to do. As far as I read and I'm informed, not even the Chancellor of Iran or even the Chancellor of the apartheid genocidal state, they are asking for a ceasefire. But the United States is provoking a ceasefire, is asking for a ceasefire, because otherwise, or the United States would be involved to defend Israel, or at least would be involved in financing even more the Zionist entity. On the other hand, I realize that the world is much bigger than the Western societies and Western powers. So the very good news for Iran comes from Pakistan, who opened the border, who committed the Pakistani government and armed forces to supply the logistics of Iran, even with missiles if it's necessary, and had the defense minister made a statement saying that if any European power attacks Iran directly, they would attack Israel directly with nuclear missiles. Simple like that. I hope they have the same conviction on acting as they are having on speeches. But this is the first time for a long, long time that the Pakistani government, since 1973, if I'm not wrong, committed their capabilities to defend an Islamic country. So it is a very good news. And on the other hand, a very important conversation between the Chancellor Sergei Lavrov from Russia and with the Chancellor of Sayed Abbas Baghti from Iran, because Russia too committed their capabilities to supplying logistics for Iran for a long, long, long campaign. So the options are on the table. If the Western powers really support Israel, they are going as far as they can. But this would be not very clever for them, because with long borders with Iran and Pakistan, Iran can resist and can attack and can maintain this campaign, military campaign, conventional one, for long term. Those are the possibilities.
It's clear, and it's really helpful to understand in which way these attacks are changing or are maybe a turning point in the region and in the world. And particularly in that sense, just one more question, Bruno. How can this impact the whole world in terms of, we've seen a lot of speculation regarding the oil market. We know that what happens in this region repercutes on different market lines all over the world. What should people pay attention in the coming days in that regard?
This is the key question on the economic side of this war. Iran would lose a lot of potential in exports, oil exports, if they close the Strait of Hormuz. This is the last option, but the biggest one. Even Iran closing the Strait of Hormuz, Iran can be still selling oil in long-term contracts to China. Most half of the China oil nowadays comes from Iran. Oil and the derivatives like petrochemical products. On the other hand, the oil that comes from the Strait of Hormuz and Red Seas is priced with the index of the Brent. The Brent is the European oil price. So all of the Western powers in Europe, the European Union specifically, and some other countries who are allied to the United States, like South Korea, Japan, Australia, they will pay a lot for it, a lot. And other countries who are self-sustainable in oil production, like United States, Brazil, and Venezuela, would have the chance to spread the production and maritime commerce routes, even with this war. So the first oil shock in the 21st century would change the balance of oil production, going farther from Middle Eastern and reinforcing those countries who have conditions to produce oil and have strong petrochemical industry, like, for example, Brazil.
We'll be closely monitoring, of course, the situation and continue to go through everything that is happening here. Thank you so much, Bruno, for joining us here in teleSUR English.
Thanks for having me and count on it. Thank you.
That was Bruno Lima Rocha, politologist and international relations professor, going over the recent attacks, that retaliatory attacks that Iran is having on Israel. Of course, we have been closely monitoring this and also trying to understand the deeper impacts and the deeper consequences that this will have, is already having, not only in the region, the shifting of powers, the way in which the international powers, including Western powers, are pushed to get involved in this situation or not, and also the wider impact in terms of global economics. We were talking about the oil prices and how Israeli exports can be very much affected by this situation. So a lot of things to keep in mind to really understand what is happening at this moment. Also, a significant point that Bruno Lima Rocha was making was the difference between these attacks that we are covering at this moment, that we are witnessing, and the attacks that Israel had on Iran and that Iran retaliated in the year 2024. At that moment, we had an exchange of attacks, but in this case, Iran unleashed a series of missile attacks that is being called the Operation True Promise 3, and that really challenged those Israeli defense systems, which some experts, as we were just saying, have just said that have been completely overpowered. That's why we're looking at images of impacts and of consequences in Iran, in Israeli soil, that have never been seen before in the occupied territories by the Zionist entity. So we continue to look at these impacts and the consequences, the ongoing situation in the Middle East as this exchange of fire continues, in particular with the impact that the Iranian missiles are having. And we continue to go over some of the most important updates from the recent hours. One of them was the latest attacks in occupied Haifa. We were looking at images on screen of the impacts that they called on a military facility, Rafael, and the destruction it was causing. We were also looking at images from the explosions and fires that these attacks caused. Also, from Iran comes the official confirmation of the murder of the chief of intelligence of the Revolutionary Guard, that is General Mohammad Qasemi, also of his assistant Hassan Mohakik. They both were murdered by Israeli aerial strikes. This is among the latest news updates that have been shared by Iranian sources in terms of the impacts and the casualties of these targeted attacks that hit military officials, also nuclear scientists, in an attack headed by Israel that particularly targeted the nuclear capabilities of Iran, but also hit significant residential areas, causing over 70 deaths. We were talking about the relevance and the importance in terms of that unprecedented strikes that Israel began on Friday morning, on early Friday morning. And we continue to follow through that information those attacks that were described as unprompted and unprovoked, not only by Iranian authorities, but also other members of the international community. Those attacks were followed and responded by the retaliatory attacks that we are now looking on screen, named Operation True Promise 3. As we had mentioned, different Iranian authorities had already stated that these retaliatory attacks were definitely coming, that attacks such as the ones that Israel had done on Iran could not go unresponded. That they could not go unresponded, that they were sure to face a definite response, and that response is what we are looking at today in this moment, that Operation True Promise 3. We continue going over the information, the latest information from Iranian territory. In this case, the Palestinian Qassam brigades have made different strikes also in support of the Iranian operation. We were talking about the link and the shows of solidarity between the Iranian operation and the Qassam brigades that have been fighting off the ongoing genocide in Gaza at the moment. And of course, the Palestinian Qassam brigades had earlier also shown their solidarity through a statement in which they prayed for the martyrdom of the Iranian officials that had been killed in the onset of the strikes from Friday morning. As we were saying, we had just confirmed the death of one more top Iranian official. In this context, the Palestinian Qassam brigades were showing their solidarity with those efforts, of course, sharing a common struggle, sharing a common impact, as well as they have also been receiving the aggression of the Zionist entity. And besides the shows of solidarity in the past hours, the Palestinian brigades have also carried out different strikes and attacks in support of this Iranian operation. We are also looking at the situation in Iranian soil as this is underway, as reports in the past minutes have stated that Iran has successfully repelled an attack on Tabriz. We were mentioning and we were looking at the importance of the effectiveness of the anti-missile systems from Iran repelling the Israeli attacks at different points of its territory. In this case, we were looking at images from Tabriz, in which an attack was intercepted by the Iranian defense. We are following the situation on a minute-by-minute basis, bringing the latest reports, of course, as this unfolds and as this continues to bring the latest updates. We were talking about the significance and the importance of the way that the anti-missile systems are playing, both on behalf of the Zionist entity and on Iran. We have seen images that many thought could not become a reality in terms of the impacts of missiles, Iranian missiles, on occupied territory occupied by Israel, in terms of the way that they overcame that barrier, that anti-missile system that had been praised internationally. So that is what led to the images of different strikes that we were showing on screen. And on the Iranian side, also the importance and the significance of the anti-missile system and defense that have been stopping and being able to repel successfully different rates of Israeli attacks, as we were seeing at this moment in Tabriz. We continue to look at these images of the attacks being repelled. In this case, in Tabriz, we also had reports from other areas of Iranian territory. We are now looking also at the impact that these exchange of missiles, and in particular the impacts of the Iranian attacks on Israel, are taking place. These are images from Kiryat Gat. After an Iranian strike, we're looking at images of destruction, explosions, and fires. This is an image that has been repeating itself in different areas of the occupied territories, now being targeted by the Iranian Operation True Promise 3, as they have caused different extent of damages, in this case setting fires. This is the case for Kiryat Gat. We were also looking at impacts in Haifa. This is just for the past hours, but the hours and days that have passed since the attacks that were launched unprovoked from Israel on Friday morning, they have continued, and bringing about this operation of defense from Iran, in this case causing different attacks and causing the damage that we are now seeing on screen. We continue to update on the latest information that we are closely monitoring since the onset of the Israeli early attacks on Friday that targeted Iranian soil, its nuclear facilities, military officers, and civilian sites and residences. Iranian authorities stated that these could not go unresponded and that they focused on the launching of their retaliatory campaign that was called Operation True Promise 3, and we are now seeing on screen the impacts and the consequences that this series of attacks are having in the occupied territories described as the State of Israel. Let's recall that also in this context, the Iranian forces have sent a message of solidarity and also of alert to the Palestinians living in the occupied territories to stay away from nuclear facilities, areas that could hold radiation, and any other key strategic target to avoid any damage and any danger in the face of this situation, of this reality. Again, another show of support between the Iranian operation and the Palestinians in the occupied territories that have been undergoing a genocide in the face of the world. The world have witnessed the situation in Palestine for the past years, and the consequences that Israel is facing right now cannot be thought of apart from the situation that millions of Palestinians have been facing since October of 2023. We continue to update on the recent data and information regarding this ongoing situation. Let's recall this was unleashed after the attacks headed by Israel on Friday morning, later responded by Iran in the series of missile attacks that we are looking at on screen and closely monitoring. We have been speaking from teleSUR English to different analysts and experts regarding the situation. Many have pointed out to the difference of this situation regarding the latest attacks between Israel and Iran in 2024. In that moment, there were an exchange of attacks that were mostly seen as one-time attacks, and the situation ended in that exchange of fire. In this moment, what we're seeing is a continuous rate of missiles from Iran to Israel. Many are pointing out to the possible fact that Israel may have overestimated its defense capabilities, that the Israeli population may also have overestimated its defense capabilities, and they are now facing a different situation. Now, with more information, Iran's health ministry announced that since the start of the Israeli aggression, 224 people, including women and children, have been killed in Israeli attacks, with over 90% being civilians. This is a recent report from the Iranian health ministry that, we reiterate, have stated that the Israeli assaults have killed 224 people, that is including women and children. We were commenting on the fact that the Israeli attacks that took place and started on Friday, that were unprovoked, that began this escalation of violence in the region, and that experts are saying may be unleashing a conventional war that will not stop as easily as an exchange of fire has stopped in the past. These attacks targeted not only military and nuclear facilities, but also residential areas and civilian areas. And of course, we have this confirmed by the fact that among the 224 people killed are also women and children. We continue looking at images from the impacts that Israel have caused on Iran, as we were reiterating these important latest information from the Iranian Health Ministry reporting that the Israeli strikes have killed 224 people, that is women and children as well. Other information suggests that 90% of those 224 people murdered were civilians. Another piece of information, we were talking about the latest reports and the latest information coming from Israel and Iran, as the latest strikes from the retaliatory attacks from Iran are coming and having their greatest impacts in different areas of the occupied territories. 2 Israeli intelligence agents were detained in Iran, and more than 200 kilograms of explosives were seized as well. We continue to closely follow the latest information that is being issued by the different news outlets, also correspondents on sites. We're going through the different pieces of information and relevant updates. We continue to follow this exchange of fire, and in particular the impact of the Iranian attacks, as different news outlets are also reporting that the casualties are happening in Israel as well. Just moments ago, we were talking about the official confirmation coming from Iran that it's the intelligence chief of the Iranian Guard Corps had also been confirmed to have been killed. And as this is ongoing, the different repercussions in terms of the international impact and the involvement of the international community is also underway. We were talking about the contradictory situation and expressions that come from the United States in terms of trying to diplomatically distance themselves from the situation, while also trying to support or back these aggressions. We're talking about the comments made by President Donald Trump in support of the attacks led by the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And in this context of the impact that the international community is having, we see that also European Union foreign ministers have agreed to meet on Tuesday. In this case, the European Union Foreign Policy Chief, Kaja Kallas, has called a video conference of European Union foreign ministers for Tuesday to discuss developments in the Middle East. The spokesperson has stated that in light of the gravity of the situation in the Middle East, EU High Representative Kaja Kallas has convened a meeting of EU Foreign Affairs Ministers via video link for Tuesday. We were talking earlier about the request that Israel had issued on Western powers to support its offensive on Iran, and the reticence that many were showing. Also, the backing that the Zionist state got from different powers. We're talking about the contradictory position of the United States in terms of its diplomatic stance versus its historical and material backing and support of the State of Israel and all of its military endeavors. In that context are the heads of the European countries as well, now facing a new escalation of violence, which started with this attack headed by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who decided and also backed this military offensive against Iran that had been unprovoked without any previous exchange of aggressions. A state of Israel that decides to take this stance after years of perpetrating an ongoing genocide and being called on by the international community to stop the escalation of violence after the agencies of the United Nations have held Israeli authorities such as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu personally responsible for that ongoing genocide. In that context, Israel decides to continue its escalation of violence, targeting, in this case, Iran, and forcing the Western powers to position themselves in this context. We were also going over not only the diplomatic and material position that the Western powers are faced with at this moment, but also the economic repercussions that this situation will or may have in commercial markets in general, and how that can impact the different countries around the world, and how that may condition as well not only the next steps of the State of Israel in this case, but also of its main allies. We continue following the information For example, news outlets are stating that media authorities in Israel are reporting on the statements made by two Israeli ministers stating that the state of emergency in the internal front could last over a month. These are recent pieces of information that are coming from local news outlets, also their correspondents on site reporting on the latest development. In this case, stating that the state of emergency in Israel could last up to 1 month. We were also reporting on the recent statement by Iran's health ministry saying that the Israeli strikes on Iran have led to 224 people that have been killed since the Zionist entity began launching strikes on the country. Among those figures was also the fact that over 90% of those casualties were civilians, speaking to the extent and also the quality and the motive behind these Israeli attacks that began early Friday morning and then prompted the retaliation attacks headed by Iran in their Operation True Promise 3. We continue going over the latest information from Israel as the impacts of the Iranian Operation True Promise 3 have caused different extent of damages. In this case, we were looking at images on its impacts in different areas. Kiryat Gat was one of them, Haifa another. We continue to look at these images and report on the recent events and news that come from the site and from the region. We were lately talking about the importance of the recent statement made by Iranian health authorities that pointed to the casualties of the impacts and strikes made by the Zionist entity in the territory being of 224, most of them causing the life of civilian population. We continue to go over the recent information on the repercussions of this Operation True Promise on Israel. According to local news outlets, Israeli occupation artillery has shelled and gunfire on aid seekers north of Nusrat camp in central Gaza Strip. We were saying how the attacks and the ongoing genocide in Gaza has not stopped due to this ongoing situation with Iran at the moment. Some of our analysts were also pointing out to the possibility that, quite on the contrary, these attacks from Israel on Gaza would increase its power as a way to put pressure on the international community and continue pressuring that population, holding them captive in a way. And we were saying just how as Israel itself was being targeted by the retaliatory attacks of Iran, as Israeli authorities were also taking to different social networks to express that targeting civilian population was crossing a red line and calling for the compassion of the international community. At the same time, the Zionist entity was continuing their attacks on the Gazan population, as they have been doing so since the increase of violence and attacks since October of 2023. And with a particular way of doing that in the past months that have been to target those in most need, to target those who were seeking aid at different distribution points. That is also among the most important and relevant information that is coming from the site as we continue to look at images from the impacts of Iranian missiles in the Israeli state, different areas of the occupied territories. Also, according to news outlets, in terms of the Iranian defense systems that we have been saying have been underway and alert and active since the beginning of the Israeli attacks on Friday morning. According to Tasnim news agency, 2 Israeli drones were shot down over Bakershan in northern Iran. We were looking at images just moments ago from those defense systems being activated and shutting down some of the Israeli attacks. In this case, in the latest report, we have the shooting down of 2 Israeli drones over Bakershan in northern Iran. We were reporting from the situation in the Middle East and also stating how this is all developing and underway at the same time. We're closely following the impacts on the occupied territories of the State of Israel, on Iranian territory and soil as well. And of course, the situation in the Palestinian territories of Gaza and the West Bank. Hours ago, we were seeing images from the Palestinians in Gaza looking at the Iranian missiles coming through in their way to different areas of the occupied territories of Israel, in a clear message of support, of solidarity between the Iranian operation and what the Palestinians have been going through for the past months. We continue to go over the latest events that were reported by different news outlets. According to Iranian sources, explosions were heard in Shariaq City, west of the capital of Tehran. Some of the impacts that were registered in Iranian territory, as well as we were mentioning. We continue to closely monitor the situation in the Middle East, as we have been doing this in teleSUR English. We continue in this way, as we have been doing so for the past days, closely monitoring the situation in the Middle East after the unprecedented and unprompted attacks from Israel on Iran unleashed the current situation now, Operation True Promise 3, led by Iran on Israel. We're looking at the impacts on territories and, of course, continue to update minute to minute